everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We are pleased and privileged to end our season this year with a conversation with Senator Mike Lee. Senator, good to see you. It's been a while since we've had a one-on-one.
It's good to see you again.
And a lot of stuff has happened since we've talked. Well, I would like to start this conversation and get right into it, talking about the whole issue of public lands transfer. The state of Utah has passed House Bill 148, and the surrounding states are in the process of passing very similar legislation, and there is a movement that has been taking foot. What can happen at the federal level to assist this process? And I would preface that by saying at a rural summit recently, a radio commentator from Salt Lake City basically said, this public lands transfer is crazy talk. Do you see it as crazy talk, or is there a real legitimate constitutional push for this?
Well, what I think is crazy is the fact that we've got one landowner owning 2/3 of our land in one state. That landowner, being a sovereign government, the United States of America, declares itself exempt from taxation, and as a result, our communities can't rely on the property tax revenue that would otherwise come from that land. They can't rely on the economic development that would otherwise occur on that land. And I think that's a problem. So I think what's crazy is for us to do nothing about it and to continue to allow hardworking Utahns who are hurt by this in a very real, very tangible way to have no avenue for relief. So I commend those who were behind this legislative effort, and I want to do everything I can to support them.
You know, back in the 1800s, it was a Missouri senator that actually got the ball moving on the Midwestern states to have that same constitutional promise fulfilled. It was Senator Benton. Does it need a push from the federal side to make this not just a sagebrush rebellion of 20 years ago?
I think it does, and I think we need not just one Senator Benton for today, but I think we need a lot of them. I think we need a lot of people in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. House who are willing to explain, especially to those representing eastern states who don't understand federal land issues, what's really at stake here. See, there's a big misperception out there in the public, especially when you get east of the Rocky Mountains when it comes to federal public land. People tend to think of federal public land and national parks as the same thing, and they're not. National parks do consist of public land, but there's a whole lot more to it. Most of our federal public land does not consist of a national park or a wilderness area. It just consists of a whole lot of land that's owned by the federal government that sits there and can be used basically only subject to federal approval. And that has created a lot of problems. So I think there are things that we can do, and one of the things that I've tried to do is to build awareness among my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, about the very real consequences that our communities face as a result of this problem, and point out to them that if nothing else, we ought to make sure that the federal government fully funds the PILT program, the Payment in Lieu of Taxes program, so that it pays the rough equivalent of what it would be paying as an actual taxpayer if it were to own that land, if it were a private owner. If it were to pay some rough approximation of that, then at least our local governments would be held harmless from the most devastating effects of this massive federal land ownership.
Well, while we've gone down that road, you know, there's some real concern. I mean, some mortifying concern with the local county commissioners across the state that PILT's not even going to come forward this next year. I know that the sequestration is looking at maybe a 5% curtailment, but they're worried if it's even going to fund at all. And this is, particularly at budget time right now, is really weighing on them heavily. Is there a chance that it may not be funded at all next year?
Well, look, when the government giveth, the government taketh away. And the whole idea of PILT was a good one, payment in lieu of taxes. But in practice, it has been, we will pay you what we feel like paying based on what we feel like we reasonably can pay or have to pay. It's not any effort to roughly approximate the actual tax-assessed value of the land and to pay a tax equivalent on that basis. And it needs to change to that. And so, yeah, I am worried about that. And that's yet another problem with this amount of land being owned by the federal government. If any other person or entity owned that much land, we'd be really concerned. And we should be no less concerned when that owner is not a private corporation or an individual or a nonprofit foundation, but a sovereign government.
We're going to